Final panel on research and policy. You already know our panel facilitator, Eileen Lynch, our executive director. Here's what you may not know.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thank you. Wow.
They like you. Eileen worked for legislators and healthcare nonprofits in Virginia and Washington, D.C. to advocate for better healthcare access and to successfully expand Medicaid to nearly 400,000 Virginians. Through the clinical experience of her family of doctors and her own experience working with low-income and rural Virginians, Eileen got a front row look at the challenges of healthcare, health payment, and aging care systems. At one point, Eileen worked for Congresswoman Jennifer Wexton, who helped spearhead the federal policy we will be discussing right now. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to the Executive Director of PRO, Eileen Lynch, and her panel.
Thank you. So everyone who has attended a support group with me knows that sometimes I go down rabbit holes talking about two things in particular, research and policy. So I am very much looking forward to this conversation we have with Julie and Kristen. I want to make sure that I get their intros out of the way before we dive in. So we have Julie Edwards right here. Julie is a Philanthropy Relationship Manager at the Michael J. Fox Foundation. Every day, Julie is inspired by the groundbreaking research that the Michael J. Fox Foundation is spearheading in the Parkinson's disease field and the community's tireless advocacy for government policies that will better serve individuals. She looks forward to the progress ahead and continuing to share resources with the community, and we'll be talking today about policy at the state and the national level. And then we have Kristen Kovaletz. Kristen serves the Michael J. Fox Foundation as Senior Philanthropy Relationship Manager for the West Coast. In her role, Kristen partners with the Fox team of researchers to understand and translate the latest Parkinson's disease research for Fox community of supporters. She is honored to share the work of the Michael J. Fox Foundation and how Parkinson's research is impacting families across California and 8 other Western states. And prior to joining the foundation, Kristen held various positions in healthcare and public health philanthropy. So we're in great hands with this panel, and we've already received a few questions for these panelists, but you do have those note cards. You can continue to write your questions, and we will have some people running around. Ethan's raising his hand to get more of those. I want to jump in with policy. So Julie, you're on the hot seat first. You know, the Fox Foundation is most commonly associated with looking for a cure. But policy at the state and federal level does play a role in your foundation's goals. Why and when did the Fox Foundation begin policy work? What can you tell us?
Yeah, that's a great question, because policy is not something that people immediately think of when they think of the Michael J. Fox Foundation. And I would say policy work has really been part of the fabric of who we are at the foundation since even before its founding. You know, when Michael J. Fox went to Congress and, you know, came out with his diagnosis publicly for the first time and petitioned Congress for federal funding for Parkinson's research, because there just wasn't really anything at that point. You know, he was like, where is the Department of Cures? And there wasn't one. And so he thought, well, okay, this is a quote from him that we say a lot at the foundation: if not us, then who? And that has really been a guiding philosophy for us. And so really advocating for this community at a government level has really been part of who we are since day one.
And I'm so glad to hear that, and I do find it surprising that I guess I don't find it surprising that the research has dominated the policy conversation, but we are going to dive into some great policy initiatives that have taken place in the last few years. Why don't you start by telling us, what are the foundation's policy priorities?
Sure, yes. So at the foundation, we are completely bipartisan. We don't look at party lines. We work with all branches of government. And we have both federal goals as well as state level goals. And I'll go more into state level and California specifically later on. But at the federal level, you know, it's everything from having that National Plan to End Parkinson's Act signed into law last year. It's now known as the National Parkinson's Project. That's going to be run by an advisory board that's going to advise on, feedback from the Parkinson's community, advocating for more effective research and funding. So I'll go more into that plan. You probably all saw the news about that last summer. And then, we've advocated for more funding for veteran care. And so just in the last 2 years, we've increased federal funding for veterans with Parkinson's by 74%. It's $6.2 million in the last 2 years. So, yeah. So I can go a little more into that later, but, and then we also on the state level, we have a lot of priorities. We're hoping for more state funds specific for Parkinson's to really infuse funding and research on those state levels and improving access to care within each state. And also establishing what we call research registries in each state. California is one of the states that does have one, only one of a handful of states at this point. And that's data collected through your doctor's office. It's then reported to the state government and the CDC to help understand the incidence and prevalence of Parkinson's within a state and even within a county like, say, Coachella Valley, to help understand what environmental impact is there in that area, or is that a big veteran community? Better understanding why there's Parkinson's in a certain state, certain area.
Why, for example, Southern California has a higher incidence of Parkinson's than other parts of the country.
Right. So that's really, and also ensuring, more fair insurance. Like when people sometimes get genetic testing done, there's protections for, you can't be discriminated against for health insurance if you know of a gene that can predispose you to something like Parkinson's, but those same protections aren't necessarily in place for life insurance or long-term disability insurance. So that's where states can come into and put protections in place for people applying for those. Yeah.
Well, I know that many people in this room have already struggled with navigating their insurance coverage, changes to the insurance that they already have or insurance that they have to get on. Some of them, navigating the hospital system. So every single person who has dealt with a chronic condition has also dealt with the frustrations and bureaucracy of it. So protections are always valued. How do you view the role of policy in feeding the larger goal of eradicating Parkinson's?
I think if I were to give a simple answer to that, I would say it's really the big infusion of funding, research that the field needs. Like I said, Michael saying, if not us, then who? 25 years later and $2 billion worth of research funded later from us as the leading private philanthropy for Parkinson's research, that's a huge milestone and a huge achievement, and it hadn't been done before, but we recognize that the really, really big funding and the really big players we need are in the government, both at the state level and at the federal level. So I would say, that's why we push so hard, we advocate for this community, because we know we're just one piece of this larger puzzle, and there's these larger systems that we need to, they need to work for this community to benefit in the long run and help us reach a cure.
Yeah. Well, let's talk federal policy. There was a really significant piece of legislation that was passed into law last summer. It was originally called the National Plan to End Parkinson's Act. They very thoughtfully shortened that to the National Parkinson's Project. This was introduced by Rep. Bilirakis and Rep. Jennifer Wexton, and that did successfully pass last year, and it is in the process of implementation. What should people know about this legislation?
Yeah. So I think one of the most remarkable things about it is that it really was a bipartisan bill because, as we know, Parkinson's doesn't care which way you vote. It can affect anyone. And so the government really, through our advocacy, which I'll go more into later, saw that this was a big concern and there was a big gap here. And so the National Parkinson's Project has a few. I'm just going to give high level. It's going to address a lot, but it essentially increased federal research funding. That's the really big thing. And also, it's supposed to help kind of streamline and develop new models of care. It's supposed to see where there are disparities in diagnosis amongst different communities. And this is all, the next immediate step of this plan is to create an advisory council within Health and Human Services. And this advisory council is going to be made up of doctors, people with Parkinson's, families, caregivers, researchers. And we can't decide who's on that panel, but we will work closely with HHS and our stakeholders in the government to help kind of advise through that process and continue advocating. But that advisory board is going to be really important for kind of keeping an eye on where funds are going, how we're implementing the program, research programs, care programs, and then each year they'll draft a report to give to the Secretary of HHS, kind of as a check-in every year to see how things are going. So that's the immediate next step, and we're in the process soon of finding people for that.
Making it reality, yeah. Exactly.
Yes.
Well, I know that the foundation was somewhat involved in the passage of that bill. What can you tell us about the advocacy that went into getting the National Parkinson's Project signed into law?
Yeah, so we have a really robust network of advocates, and that's anyone. That can be any of you in this room. And we have tools and resources through our Parkinson's Policy Network, which you can just sign up for through our website. And we provide all sorts of materials for you to be able to write to your, congresspeople, call. We provide a lot of templates and just things to make it really easy and straightforward for you to have a big impact and have that voice. And so it was through like hundreds of thousands of advocates and meetings with and joining, our policy team in meetings with Congress people. So that really was the key, was just making sure that these policymakers had a face and a name to this disease within their constituency, and showing that this community is paying attention and it's important to us. And it's addressing the fact too that, and I want to circle back to something really quickly I forgot to mention earlier, but the National Parkinson's Project, this bill is modeled after a very similar one that the Alzheimer's community passed about 15 years ago. And so it's great because we have this successful roadmap and a model for how our Parkinson's policy can work. And that bill has increased Alzheimer's federal research funding to, I want to say, $3.8 billion a year, and we're at $250 million a year in federal funding. So obviously no small change, but when you think about, government funds and government funding, it's a big gap. So we're hoping that this can really increase that funding.
I mean, when you think about the Fox Foundation has invested $2 billion in research since their founding in 2001. That is a staggering number, and yet $3.8 billion a year, and that's not a staggering number for the government. So we're really excited about this, the passage of this policy, and we're hopeful. This is something to hope for. I mean, it's notable too that 2024 is when this bill passed. We've waited this long for federal legislation. So, Kristen, I am going to get to you in a moment, but let's stick with policy a little longer.
Okay.
I want to talk about California policy.
Okay.
What should people know about recent policy efforts in California? I know there was some action last year in the California State Senate.
Yes. So there was a bill proposed to the California State Assembly to ban paraquat, which is a highly toxic pesticide that's used very widely in California in our agricultural industry. It's a pesticide that's been banned in, I want to say, 60 countries, but not the US, and it's still widely used in California. And it's been linked to a lot of neurological conditions, including Parkinson's. So that's why you see a high prevalence of it in agricultural communities. So that was proposed last year. The goal of that bill was to have a decision by January of 2026. The Assembly voted that they'll evaluate paraquat and make a decision by January of 2029. So it extends that roadmap, but we're still happy that there is a deadline. That's, sometimes these policy changes can take decades. So this is a good thing for now.
Yeah. Good thing for now. And I will mention that the state legislator that was heavily involved in the passage of that bill, she wanted to come speak to us today, but she couldn't quite make it work with her schedule. So she has sent a video, and we're excited to share that with you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Congressmember Laura Friedman, and I represent parts of LA County. I'm honored to share this message ahead of the Michael J. Fox Foundation and Parkinson's Research Organization's Educational Symposium. I want to send a special thank you to all of the incredible volunteers and leaders for organizing this event and for your tireless dedication to the Parkinson's community. Well, we know Parkinson's is the fastest growing neurological disease in the world. More than 1 million Americans are living with it today, and that number is expected to double by 2040. But Parkinson's isn't only genetic. Many cases are caused by exposure to dangerous chemicals like paraquat. Exposure to paraquat, which is a pesticide, increases the risk of Parkinson's almost 1.64 times. Paraquat is so toxic that just a sip can be fatal, but it's still widely available in the United States, used in the agricultural community. It's such a toxic herbicide that its use has been banned in more than 60 countries. That's why I have fought tirelessly to eliminate paraquat in California while I was in the state assembly. But that fight is far from over. Last year, I authored and got AB 1963 signed into law. Now, this legislation requires the Department of Pesticide Regulation to reevaluate paraquat to decide whether to retain or cancel or suspend or impose new restrictions on its use by 2029. And in November, I formally requested that the department suspend paraquat use beginning in 2025 instead of renewing its registration. Unfortunately, however, they declined. The department's preliminary report on paraquat risks are concerning, including evidence of potential harm to non-target organisms, thyroid impacts, and birth defects. Now, events like this symposium are crucial, not just for sharing the latest research and resources, but for mobilizing action on issues like paraquat. I want to thank you to everyone who joins, whether you're a researcher, a caregiver, an advocate, or someone living with Parkinson's. Your work and your dedication will help drive progress towards finding a cure. Know that I stand with you in this fight. I will keep standing alongside you to push for policies that protect public health, to advance research, and bring us closer to a future without Parkinson's. Thank you, and I look forward to our work together.
Now, you mentioned earlier a state-based research fund. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the purpose of these state-based research funds is, we have our federal funding priorities, but we also know that the states are equally important. And so there's an economic benefit to it, an economic argument, if you're looking at it that way, if you're, a state decision maker. But the idea is, we do our funding, but as I've said before, we really need the government to partner with us to infuse those really big dollars. So at a state level, that can improve the research happening within your state, and also improve, the care options within your state, improving insurance policies like those protections I mentioned. If it doesn't happen immediately at the federal level, states can have a lot of power in making that happen in each of their states. So that's where the idea for a specific state fund comes from, and it's somewhere in the ballpark. We feel like they would be around $25 million per state to start. And so I'm just looking at my notes here. That's the goal, and also, by infusing these dollars into research in your state, researchers and scientists, they have to go where the money is to fund their work. So this, if you're looking at it from a business standpoint, also establishes your state as a competitive place for top-notch researchers and doctors to come and do their work and provide their care to the Parkinson's population in that state. So there's a lot of benefits to it. Yeah.
Well, that's very exciting. I'm going to give you a chance to breathe.
Thank you.
Let's move on to research. Yeah. So, what really came out over the last few minutes is the urgency of funding to fund research. Now, the Fox Foundation is known worldwide as a Parkinson's research leader. Kristen, can you start us off with an overview of Fox research?
No easy feat. Well, I think to understand how the Michael J. Fox Foundation works, I'll ask you to do one thing that's easy and one thing that's hard. And the first thing that I think is easy is put yourself in the mind of a Parkinson's patient. I think that a lot of us can probably do that quite easily. The thing that I'll ask you to do that's a little bit harder is put yourself in the mind and body of a Parkinson's patient who's also like a really famous, beloved actor who's known around the world and loved by the masses. Maybe that's a little bit harder. When Michael was diagnosed, when he realized that there was not an immediate answer coming out of the federal government or other entities doing scientific research, he said, I'm going to use the power that I have as a public figure to make an organization that does what the government isn't doing. And he brought in experts, both business and scientific experts, to build a system that would speed up scientific research for Parkinson's specifically. And now, 25 years later, what we have is this organization that sits in between really, really, really great ideas for Parkinson's science and the money that they need to get to the finish line. And it can cost $1 billion or even $2 billion for a single drug to make it from an idea to a pharmacy shelf. And we have done $2 billion worth of research funding over 25 years, which is amazing, but we have not put it all into one basket. Instead, Fox chooses to infuse with smaller dollars, infuse researchers, organizations that are doing interesting science with funding at an early level to what we call de-risk the idea, to move the science along a little bit further, to learn a little bit more about their idea, to maybe prove a little bit more about why their idea might work, in order to attract funding from biotech, big pharma, the folks with the deep pockets who can take you $2 billion to the finish line, to get the attention of those folks so that they can be plucked from our care into the care of an organization with deeper pockets. So we think of ourselves as a facilitator of good science, moving it through the pipeline. And we want to do so really strategically. And I think that's the biggest key.
So you touched on a few really good points, especially that we often think of research as being for a cure, but that's really not the full story. What should our audience know about research into causes, therapies, disease progression? How does that feed into the larger search for the cure?
Totally. So I think of the cure for Parkinson's is like building a house. And when you finish building that house, you've found the cure. But before you start building the house, you're gonna have a much easier time building that house if you've gathered your tools, if you've gathered your lumber, if you've perhaps hired a contractor or two to help you build that house. So a cure is not always looking for the next great light bulb moment. It is also looking for all of the tools that are going to be used in getting us to that light bulb moment, which is sometimes a little bit less exciting, but is the thing that moves science forward quickly, which is what we really want. There is no shortage of ideas. This is something that our research team constantly tells us. Any dollar we raise is immediately sent out to science within 90 days because the science is always ahead of the money. So if we can make more tools to move science forward more quickly, there are always people waiting in the wings to use them. I think some of those tools are tools like the biomarker that we talked about a little bit earlier today. But not only that biomarker, improving that biomarker so it works even more effectively, that it's a stronger tool, or looking for additional biomarkers like One that I'm particularly excited about is in imaging, being able to take we're all probably familiar with a DAT scan, which measures the amount of dopamine you have in your brain, but it's not a definitive tool that tells us we have Parkinson's disease. But we're very close to an imaging tracer, like a PET scan, that actually tells you definitively, do you have the presence of the Parkinson's disease biology in your brain while you're still alive, making diagnosis and treatment a little bit easier, a little bit simpler. And I think another really important element to the question you're asking, Eileen, is that a cure is awesome. A cure is important. A cure is something that we are really excited about. But it doesn't help us today. It doesn't help the Parkinson's community right now. So we, as diligently as we look for a cure for Parkinson's disease, we are in equal measure looking to fund projects that are therapies to improve symptomology, to make your life better right now.
Parkinson's today.
Parkinson's today, right?
Well, I actually want you to pause on the 2023 biomarker breakthrough. We've referenced that, I think, once or twice over the course of the day today. Can you break down for the audience exactly what it is?
Sure. So I'll start by saying what a biomarker is in the first place. And a biomarker is a biological indicator of disease. So a great example of this is a COVID test. If you've got 2 lines, that means you unfortunately do have COVID. And that test tells us definitively, do you have the biology present in your body of something like COVID? Another one is cholesterol. When you get your cholesterol measured, when you have a blood test at the doctor, a cholesterol test is a biomarker of heart disease. And for a very long time, and I'm sure many people in this room can attest, Parkinson's is often a diagnosis of last resort. It isn't anything else, right? We didn't have a clear test that said, yes, you definitively have Parkinson's, you're this far along, so on and so forth. This was crucially important to science and also crucially important to the patient population to have an easier time getting to diagnosis. So in March of 2023, the first ever Parkinson's biomarker was definitively discovered. And basically what it does is it measures this protein called alpha-synuclein, which is from what we know right now about Parkinson's disease biology, it is the prevalent protein of interest. It is the protein that has done something wrong in your brain to cause that dopamine loss. The biomarker measures misfolded alpha-synuclein in spinal fluid, giving a 93% accuracy that you indeed have the presence of Parkinson's disease. And what the biomarker does, which I think is the crucial takeaway here, is it rapidly accelerates science for a bunch of reasons. And it's rapidly accelerating science at a time when the drug discovery pipeline is as packed as it has ever been. So this could not have come at a better time for Parkinson's disease researchers because they desperately needed a tool that could objectively measure disease in the people they were studying. To move these, not only does that move science forward faster because it objectively measures the thing that they're looking to measure, but it also gets people on board, gets organizations with really deep pockets more interested in funding this work because it is inherently less risky when you can objectively measure it. If I'm asking you, how do you feel today versus how you felt 6 weeks ago when you took the medication that we say may or may not cure your Parkinson's disease, and you're saying, well, I feel great because I'm thinking I might have cured my Parkinson's, it's not scientific. And the people with the deep pockets who are risk averse and don't want to spend money unless they really know that it's going to make a difference want objective measurements. The biomarker is that objective measure.
What are some use cases for this tool?
Yeah, so it's already being used. The one trial in particular is by a company called Vaccinity. They are studying an alpha-synuclein vaccine to prompt an autoimmune response, and they have already rolled the biomarker tool into their clinical trials to see if The vaccine does what it is aiming to do, which is to eliminate the alpha-synuclein, the misfolded alpha-synuclein. So if it does what it aims to do objectively, you would test positive on the biomarker first, receive the vaccine, and then test negative later on. That's an objective measure. And really anywhere where the UPDRS test, the Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale test, the one that you walk up and down and you do a physical examination of how you're feeling. Anywhere where that has been used in the past, we could use the biomarker instead to indicate the people in this trial for this tool that may cure Parkinson's disease are exactly the right people to be there right now. And we take a measurement now, and we'll take a measurement later and hope that they change.
Fascinating. I will remind you, you have note cards. If you have questions, raise them up. We've got people who can collect them for you. And I've got one or two more questions, and then we will be shifting to the audience. What can you share with us about research currently in the pipeline with Fox?
Yeah. So I said before, and I'm not lying, this is the most robust the research pipeline has ever been. And this is coming from a place of, we have double the number of drugs on the market for people with Parkinson's over the last 10 years. The pipeline has already been robust. It is more robust than ever before. This is a great time to be a Parkinson's disease scientist. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening. So we're looking at we're monitoring 150 treatments that are in human clinical trials. That's not even counting things that are in animal models, preclinical bench level science. This is human clinical trials. 150 of them are happening across the world, because Fox does not care where you are doing good science. We just care that it's good science. 40% of the trials we fund are outside the US. And those 150 human trials are really split 50-50. Half of them are looking at what we'd call a disease-modifying tool, something that is changing the underlying biology of the disease with the expectation that it would slow, stop, or reverse the symptomology. And the other half are tools that are going to impact symptoms. A lot of what we care deeply about are the unmet needs of the Parkinson's population. What are symptoms that don't currently have good therapies on the market? Things like falling, freezing, gait and balance issues, mild cognitive changes, apathy, depression, swallowing, speaking, things that there aren't always great tools, or there aren't a ton of great tools to solve. Those are the projects we are especially interested in funding, because we want to serve the future. We want a cure for the future for Parkinson's disease, and we want to serve people today, the whole sort of gamut of their unmet needs.
So this might be a tricky one to answer, but what does the future of Parkinson's research look like?
I mean, where's your crystal ball? Did you bring it? Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but I can make a handful of assumptions. As we've been able to better measure Parkinson's disease, and like Julie mentioned earlier, we're like a hop, skip, and a jump behind Alzheimer's, which has had a biomarker for a minute. As biomarker tools are being rolled into clinical trials, we're finding out that there are a lot of overlapping pathologies. So people will have Parkinson's disease, but they'll also have evidence of other pathologies, other neurological diseases. And the argument there could be maybe when one thing breaks, other things break, but you're not necessarily experiencing those symptoms. Or it could also be the explanation for why, when you've met one person with Parkinson's, you've met one person with Parkinson's, and everyone's disease journey looks so different. We're not really quite sure why, but what we do know is by measuring those overlapping pathologies, finding out how truly different and unique your brain is versus your neighbor's, even if you have the same diagnosis, the future of Parkinson's disease therapies and potentially a cure is unique, targeted, curated therapy that is for you specifically, and putting a bunch of tools together like a cocktail and saying, this is for your brain and no one else's. And that's, I think, where where a lot of the excitement is.
Yeah.
I'm excited about that. It's pretty interesting. It's pretty cool.
I find it fascinating, the thought, as the research deepens and we get a better understanding of when and where Parkinson's starts, we realize that it does require a much more tailored approach per individual. We have the kind of blanket carbidopa-levodopa pill regimen right now, but the future of Parkinson's, I think, is a lot more complex than that. Well, this one's for both of you. And as a follow-up, how do the policy and research teams at the Fox Foundation work together?
I would say, as I've mentioned ad nauseum, the advocacy and the policy we're hoping will lead to more funding at the federal and state level. I think those efforts to get that funding where it needs to go on a large scale, that's going to make the work for the researchers easier because they're going to have more of the resources they need, more sites that are, perhaps equipped for that kind of research they're doing. That's really where I see them going hand in hand, or maybe just one leading to the benefit of the other. So, yeah.
Yeah.
What about you?
I co-sign everything Julie said. I think that, like she said, the federal government can unlock tools that help researchers do their jobs a little bit better. And so if we think again to building our house, we collect tools, we collect lumber, we collect contractors. Sometimes you need to collect cooperation from large entities that sometimes don't like to talk to each other because they would prefer to keep their secrets secret from each other. There's all of those are the tools in our toolkit that are going to speed science forward. And so I think of the policy team as the ultimate toolkit hunter-gatherers who are enabling research to do what they really do best, which is brilliant science.
Quite a few of you have the same question. What can I do to help advance Parkinson's research?
You can participate in clinical trials. If you've come to the MJFF booth today, I may have talked to you about this, but there are a lot of ways to participate in science, no matter whether or not you have Parkinson's disease, if you're a caregiver of someone or a family member, if you're on medication or off medication, there are options for you to participate in science. And some of these things are experimental new drugs, and others of these things are questions that we ask you, or blood samples, brain scans, ways to better understand what's going on in your brain so we can extrapolate that in everyone else's brains. A tool I love is called Fox Trial Finder. It's kind of like Match.com, but for Parkinson's. You're welcome. But you put in a few details about yourself, where you live, how far you can travel, where you are in your journey with PD, and it spits out all of your potential love matches in terms of what clinical trials you are eligible for. So Fox Trial Finder, I can't stress it enough. It's a fantastic tool. Use it. It connects directly to all of the individual trials. You click them, you find the primary investigator, their contact information. It really makes it easy.
Okay, I've got a possibly tricky one for you here. Oh, no. Can someone be tested today in Coachella Valley for the Parkinson's biomarker?
Probably, I would imagine.
Yeah.
It would be something to ask. Is
Dr. Legg?
Is Dr. Legg still here? The biomarker tool that I mentioned, that's the spinal fluid test, is not being rolled into a clinical setting yet. It is an option. I believe it is an out-of-pocket cost right now, but it's mainly being utilized in research, and then I think we'll roll into a clinical setting later on. That being said, it is an option for you. If you are particularly interested in taking the biomarker test and you don't want to pay for it, another plug I have is for Michael J. Fox Foundation's longitudinal study, the Parkinson's Progression Markers Initiative. If you've been to the booth, we also have flyers about this with QR codes on them. This is a study you can join that takes, if you're eligible, can take samples from you, including spinal fluid for that biomarker test, and runs it to help us create a large repository of Parkinson's disease data that can be downloaded and studied by scientists all over the world for free.
So you mentioned spinal fluid a few times. How invasive is this test?
Look, I mean, what I am told, I have not had a lumbar puncture in many years. What I am told is that it is not too scary, but I can't speak with authority on that. But what I will tell you is that we know that misfolded alpha-synuclein, once it misfolds up here in your substantia nigra, like we were talking about earlier, it travels all over the body. It is in so many different places in the body. And spinal fluid is just the first place that we were able to figure out how to measure it. We know that it exists in the tears. We know that it exists in your blood, and we know that it exists on your skin. And so one of the ways that we are currently advancing that biomarker tool is by making it more readily accessible. So there is a new skin test that is being rolled out, which I know somebody was talking about earlier today. We are studying how alpha-synuclein shows up in your skin. We are studying how it shows up in your blood serum. And all of this is for the purpose of, if we think back to cholesterol, right? Cholesterol measures heart disease. Every year when you go to your annual physical, you get blood drawn and your cholesterol gets run. This is a very normal thing. What the future of Parkinson's disease could look like is you go to your annual physical and it's a blood serum test or it's a skin sample test that's rolled into your regular sort of cadre of care. Because like Dr. Legg said earlier, by the time you start to experience symptoms of Parkinson's disease, you've lost upwards of 70% of the dopamine in your brain. The biomarker is testing you or is resulting in a positive test long before someone ever has a single first symptom. So if we have a vaccine or an immunotherapy or something like that for PD, and something like a skin test or a blood test is rolled into someone's annual physical, you know, Eileen, you could go to the physician, you could get your blood drawn, and they could call you back and, you know, upload to your MyChart that says, unfortunately, you've tested positive for misfolded alpha-synuclein, but you don't have any symptoms of Parkinson's disease yet. It's okay, we've caught it, we're gonna give you this tool, this vaccine or whatever, that's going to stop those symptoms in their tracks. Because a cure is awesome and a cure is the goal, but the silver bullet is prevention. Let's use the biomarker tool, hopefully not in a spinal tap, as a methodology for prevention. And I will tell you that the scaffolding for prevention trials is currently being built at the Michael J. Fox Foundation. It's not, I'm not talking out of my,
I think that
you know,
deserves a round of
it's
applause. I mean, that's amazing news. And with Parkinson's, we often kind of look back. When we get the diagnosis, we look back and we start to see, oh, I lost my sense of smell, or oh, I had trouble with constipation, or oh, I did have that sleeplessness. So the idea that we could actually experience any of those symptoms and stop it in its tracks right there, say, hey, this is something that you've got and that you can prevent. I mean, it would really transform things. Next question, please give some examples of therapies to improve symptomology that the foundation is funding.
Ooh, good one. Do you want to take this?
A historical example?
I mean, one that I think is a great example because it really shows how we work is a few years ago, we spoke to the patient community, our patient council. We have a council of people with Parkinson's disease who tell us sort of what's missing, what could we be doing better, and what could we be funding better. And one of the things that they told us was missing were tools to manage off periods. So that's when you've taken your medication, but it wears off, your symptoms return, but it's not time for you to take your next dose of the medication. So we were looking for rescue therapies, and we put out a call to researchers that we wanted to fund rescue therapy, something that would bridge you from when your medication wears off to when you could take your next dose. And so there was a great potential tool that was brought to us for funding, and it was an inhaler. It was an inhaled form of levodopa that you could take a tiny little puff and it would sort of smooth you over for a couple more hours, right? And so we say that seems like a great idea. And so we funded them at a small dollar amount. And that put them through the next level of clinical trials, which were very positive, which we loved. And then we funded them again, a little bit more money. We used Fox Trial Finder. We let them borrow data of ours. We put a consortium of experts together to help them move that project forward. And then another much larger biotech company came in and acquired that technology and pushed it forward through the last stage of clinical trials, and then was approved at the FDA and is now a tool called Inbrija, which is an inhaled form of levodopa that you can receive a prescription for if you're eligible, and it's a good tool for you today. And I have a friend who uses Inbrija, and he talks about, he loves golfing, and he talks about how he needs to sit down at one of the holes, and I'm not gonna remember the holes because I don't know anything about golf, unfortunately. But he sits down and he stays in the car. He takes a puff and he stays in the car for 2 holes. And after 2 holes, he's ready to go again. And that's like a great example of our model at work, right?
I'm guessing we have some golfers in the room. We are in
I
Coachella Valley.
I realize I'm in hostile territory by saying I don't know anything about golf. She's a good golfer.
So I've got another question here about, we've talked a lot about Parkinson's, but there is a large field of conditions called Parkinsonisms, including things like PSP, which is actually what Jennifer Wexton, our congresswoman that we referenced earlier, has. Is there any research that the Fox Foundation is investing in that addresses Parkinsonisms like PSP?
Yeah.
And sorry, for those in the audience, PSP is, what's the first P?
Progressive.
Progressive supranuclear palsy. Thank you. Assist from the team here.
Yes. So Parkinsonisms are often like Parkinson's on steroids. It's where it presents initially as Parkinson's, but the meds don't really do their job, and often it's a much faster progressing disease. Parkinsonisms can include multisystem atrophy, Lewy body dementia, PSP, others.
I mean, I think there's over 80.
There are over 80, and they're much
Yeah.
rarer, and they historically have received rare disease funding at the NIH. But because the symptomology is really similar, the biology, not the symptomology, but rather the biology, the thing going wrong in the person's brain is similar to Parkinson's disease, we're often learning from and studying that science in conjunction with Parkinson's science. A good example that I can think of is multisystem atrophy is a Parkinsonism where you have misfolded alpha-synuclein, same as with PD, but it's not happening in the substantia nigra, it's happening in the cerebellum, and there's a lot more of it. And it's really easy, not really easy, but it's much easier comparatively to measure. Because there's more of it, it's an easier part of the brain to measure. So when we were thinking about these imaging tracers, like I mentioned earlier today, where we could potentially view Parkinson's in someone's brain while they're alive, we looked to MSA first, and we said, can we test this technology in a part of the brain that's easier to view? And the answer was yes. And so we successfully were able, the researchers using our funding and using collaboration, were successfully able to measure misfolded alpha-synuclein in people with MSA. And we were able to extrapolate that science and are currently extrapolating that science in order to make it work for people with Parkinson's. And we wouldn't be able to do that without cooperation from those fields.
Well, thank you for sharing. How are we doing on time? One more question? I've got one more question. Okay. Why is the percent of Parkinson's higher in Southern California than other areas? I can jump in on this one too if you want me to. So I think it's really important to note that we don't really know what causes Parkinson's. There's lots of theories out there, and there's an increasing body of science that informs us on the causes of Parkinson's, but that very basic what causes Parkinson's is still a mystery. However, we know that 85% of Parkinson's cases, approximately 85%, fall under this category, environmental. What that means is it's not genetic. So 15%, there is something in your genetic makeup that predisposes you for Parkinson's. Everything else is this question mark environmental. That can mean bad air quality. There's studies indicating that areas with really bad air quality have a higher incidence of Parkinson's. It can mean exposure to pesticides. We talked about paraquat. We have a large farming community in California, and we have a very large farming community in East Coachella Valley. We also have a unique geography. We are a valley. Everyone who lives around here has seen those days where you wake up and the sky is really hazy. Air gets trapped here. But I think the most simple reason is actually that we have an aging population. Coachella Valley, as I mentioned, does have an older population than the rest of the US. Los Angeles is the same way. Los Angeles, I hope I get this stat right, but the population of people in Los Angeles over the age of 65 is expected to increase by something along the lines of 400% in the next 10 years, next 20 years. So we have an aging population. Parkinson's is an age-related illness, although there are significant number of young people with Parkinson's. We know that bad air quality, we know that pollutants can influence Parkinson's as well. So it's a conglomeration, is how I would sum it up. Do you have anything to add?
I think, and this is more so speculation, but also based on what I've learned through this role, is that veterans are disproportionately affected by Parkinson's and other neurological diseases, and so if you have an aging veteran population that maybe fought in foreign wars, exposure to heavy metals and really intense chemicals or burn pits, like these are things that have all been tied to. We saw the Camp Lejeune. It can happen here in groundwater sometimes and on military bases. So it's an ongoing conversation, which is why part of our policy work is implementing more funding and research in clinical care and education for the veteran community with Parkinson's. And I know that California has a really big naval and military population. We're kind of a hub for that. So again, speculation, but that would also maybe be my guess as well.
Well, we're here in Coachella Valley. We're sandwiched between massive military base in San Diego. We have the 29 Palms military base, and certainly I know there's a few veterans in the room. And by the way, thank you for your service. That deserves applause, I think. Well, I think we are just about out of time. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Kristen. And thank you, everyone here, for sticking it out for several long but very informative hours.